The desert wind carried dust across the cracked highway as Miguel Reyes stood outside the abandoned gas station, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. His hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette, the flame dancing in the evening breeze. At 32 years old, he had the eyes of someone much older, eyes that had seen too much, decided too much, survived too much. But tonight, those eyes betrayed something new. Fear. The black SUV appeared as a distant speck on the empty road, growing larger with each passing second. Miguel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check it. He knew what it said. He knew who sent it. And he knew with absolute certainty that everything he had built over the past 8 years was about to collapse. Because he had trusted the wrong man, Miguel hadn't always been afraid. There was a time when fear felt like a distant concept, something that belonged to other people in other lives. He grew up in San Rafael, a border town where opportunities died young and dreams were luxuries nobody could afford. His father worked in a factory that closed when Miguel was 12. His mother cleaned houses for families who barely acknowledged her existence. His younger sister, Carmen, deserved college, deserved escape, deserved everything the world refused to give them. Miguel tried the legitimate path. He worked construction, loading docks, anything that paid, but the math never worked. Rent, food, Carmen's school supplies, his mother's medications, the numbers always came up short. He watched his father's spirit break a little more each day, watched his mother's hands crack and bleed from chemicals, watched Carmen's hope fade every time she talked about university. The invitation came on an ordinary Tuesday. Javier Santos was a neighborhood legend, the kind of man who drove expensive trucks and wore gold watches while everyone else counted coins. He found Miguel outside a convenience store, counting crumpled bills to see if he had enough for groceries. "You're better than this," Javier had said, leaning against his polished vehicle. "You're smart. I've been watching you. You don't complain, you don't steal, you work hard, but you're drowning anyway, aren't you?" Miguel didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I can offer you something," Javier continued. "One job, simple transportation, $5,000, cash, 1 night of work." $5,000. Miguel did the calculation instantly. That was 4 months of construction wages. That was Carmen's tuition for a semester. That was his mother finally visiting a real doctor instead of suffering in silence. "What kind of transportation?" Miguel asked, though he already knew the answer. Javier smiled. "The kind where you don't ask questions." That night, Miguel drove a truck across the desert to a location he was told to forget. He didn't look in the back. He didn't stop except for gas. He delivered the vehicle to a warehouse, collected an envelope thick with cash, and walked away. He told himself it was just once, but once was never just once. The second job came easier than the first. The third, easier than the second. Miguel discovered he had a talent for staying calm under pressure, for reading situations, for knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. These were valuable skills in Javier's world. Within 6 months, Miguel wasn't just driving trucks, he was coordinating shipments, managing schedules, solving problems. He became indispensable. Javier promoted him, trusted him, brought him deeper into the organization. The money transformed everything. Carmen enrolled in university, the best in the region. His mother quit cleaning houses and finally got treatment for her arthritis. His father stopped looking quite so broken. Miguel moved them all to a better neighborhood, one where the streets were paved and the water ran clean. He justified it by focusing on the good he was doing. His family was safe. Carmen was getting educated. His parents could live with dignity. What did it matter where the money came from? The world had refused to help them through legitimate means. This was just another form of survival. But survival had a price. Miguel witnessed his first execution when he was 25. A driver had been skimming product, selling it independently. Javier called a meeting in a warehouse. Everyone was required to attend. The man was brought in, already beaten, his face purple and swollen. "Loyalty," Javier had said calmly, walking around the trembling man, "is everything. Without loyalty, we have nothing. Without trust, we die." The gunshot echoed in Miguel's ears for weeks. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself leaving would endanger his family. He told himself he was in too deep. All of these things were true, but they were also excuses. The real truth was simpler and more terrible. Part of him had started to enjoy the power. By his late 20s, Miguel had become one of Javier's most trusted lieutenants. He managed operations across 3 territories, controlled dozens of workers, and handled millions in revenue. People feared him. People respected him. When he walked into a room, conversations stopped. The transformation was complete. The desperate young man counting coins outside a convenience store had died. In his place stood someone harder, colder, more dangerous. Miguel wore expensive clothes now, drove luxury vehicles, carried a gun he had used more than once. His family knew something had changed, but they didn't ask questions. Carmen was thriving at university, studying medicine. His mother attended church more frequently, perhaps praying for a son she no longer quite recognized. His father simply looked relieved that the struggle was over, unwilling to examine how. Miguel had a reputation for intelligence and fairness, rare qualities in their world. He didn't kill unnecessarily. He didn't cheat his workers. He solved problems through strategy rather than violence when possible. This made him valuable not just to Javier, but to the entire organization. It also made him ambitious. The territories Miguel controlled were the most profitable in Javier's network. His shipments always arrived on time. His security was impeccable. His crews were loyal. Miguel started to wonder why he was working for someone else. Why was Javier collecting the majority of the profit when Miguel was doing the majority of the work? These thoughts were dangerous. Miguel knew that. But once they took root, they grew like weeds, spreading through his mind until they consumed everything else. That's when he met Diego Moreno. Diego appeared at one of Miguel's warehouses on a humid afternoon in July. He was younger than Miguel, perhaps 28, with an easy smile and the kind of charisma that made people trust him instantly. He claimed to represent a new distribution network, one that could move product faster and more efficiently than current arrangements. Miguel was immediately suspicious. In their world, strangers were threats until proven otherwise. But Diego came with references from reliable contacts. He knew details about operations that only insiders would know. And his proposal was compelling, 15% increase in profit margins with reduced risk. They met several times over the following weeks. Diego was smart, educated, familiar with logistics and finance in ways that most people in their business weren't. He talked about expansion, about modernizing operations, about building something more sophisticated than the crude networks that currently existed. More importantly, Diego talked about independence. "You're the one doing all the work," Diego said during one of their meetings, sipping expensive whiskey in a hotel bar. "Javier sits back and collects. You could do this yourself. You have the connections, the reputation, the intelligence. Why give him 60% when you could keep it all?" Miguel had thought the same thing countless times, but hearing someone else say it made it feel possible rather than just fantasy. "Javier would never allow it," Miguel replied. "He'd see it as betrayal. He'd kill me and everyone I love." Diego leaned forward. his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not if we're careful. Not if we do it right. I have connections you don't. Distributors who are tired of Javier's inflexibility, buyers who want someone younger and more modern to work with. We could transition your operations slowly, piece by piece. By the time Javier realizes what's happening, you'll be too powerful for him to touch." The plan was seductive. Diego made it sound simple, inevitable, destined to succeed. He had answers for every concern Miguel raised. He projected confidence that bordered on certainty. Miguel should have recognized the danger. He had survived 8 years in a lethal business by being paranoid, by trusting slowly, by verifying everything. But Diego had found his weak spot, ambition mixed with resentment. The combination was intoxicating. Over the next 3 months, Miguel and Diego built their parallel operation. Miguel started redirecting small percentages of shipments to Diego's distributors. The profits were reinvested into their new network. Diego introduced Miguel to contacts, buyers, transporters, security personnel, all seemingly loyal and professional. Everything worked perfectly. Too perfectly. Miguel should have noticed that Diego always had the right answer, the right connection, the right solution. He should have questioned why someone so capable and well-connected needed a partner at all. He should have wondered why Diego was willing to settle for an equal split when he claimed to bring more to the partnership. But success is a powerful drug. Each successful shipment, each influx of profit, each step toward independence made Miguel more confident and less cautious. Diego encouraged this, praising Miguel's intelligence, feeding his ego, making him believe he was special, destined for more than being someone else's lieutenant. The partnership deepened. They made decisions together, planned expansions, discussed long-term strategy. Miguel started to think of Diego as more than a business partner. He became a friend, perhaps the first real friend Miguel had made since entering this world. Everyone else in his life either feared him or wanted something from him. Diego seemed to genuinely respect him. This was the fatal mistake. In their world, friendship was a liability. Trust was a weapon someone could use to destroy you. Miguel learned this lesson too late. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday night in October. One of Miguel's drivers, a reliable man named Roberto, who had worked for him for 3 years, disappeared. His truck was found abandoned near the border, the shipment missing. Miguel called Diego immediately. "We have a problem. Roberto's gone, and so is $250,000 in product." Diego's response was calm, reassuring. "Roberto's probably just scared. Maybe he got spooked by patrol. Give it 24 hours, he'll surface." But Roberto didn't surface. His body was found 3 days later in the desert, execution style, with the kind of brutality that sent a message. Miguel's instinct screamed warning. This wasn't random, but when he tried to investigate, he hit walls. His usual contacts suddenly knew nothing. Security footage from the route had mysteriously corrupted. The distributors who were supposed to receive that shipment claimed they never placed the order. "Someone's making a move against us," Miguel told Diego during an emergency meeting. "Someone knows about our operation and they're trying to shut us down." Diego agreed, his face grave with concern. "It has to be Javier. He must have found out. We need to accelerate our timeline, make the break now before he can organize a full response." This made sense to Miguel. Of course Javier would retaliate. Of course he'd be ruthless. Miguel had been preparing for this, building his own security, making sure his family was protected. He had always known the transition would be dangerous. What he didn't know was that the danger wasn't coming from the direction he expected. The second incident happened a week later. One of Miguel's most secure warehouses was raided, not by police, but by armed men who knew exactly what they were looking for. They took everything: product, cash, weapons. 4 of Miguel's people were killed in the assault. Miguel was losing money, losing soldiers, losing control. The organization he had spent months building was bleeding out. He called an emergency meeting with all his remaining lieutenants, trying to identify the leak, trying to understand who was betraying them. Diego sat beside him during this meeting, offering suggestions, analyzing possibilities. He was the voice of reason, the steady hand while Miguel's world crumbled. "We should meet with Javier," Diego suggested after the meeting ended and they were alone. "Negotiate a truce. We're losing too much too fast. Maybe we can arrange something. Give him a percentage, keep operating independently under his umbrella. It's not what we wanted, but it's better than dying." Miguel resisted at first. The idea of crawling back to Javier felt like failure, like humiliation, but the math was undeniable. He was bleeding resources he couldn't afford to lose. His people were scared. Some were already talking about leaving, about making their own deals to save themselves. "You're right," Miguel finally admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Set it up, somewhere neutral. Make sure Javier understands we're coming in good faith." Diego arranged everything. The meeting would take place at the abandoned gas station on the desert highway, neutral territory, far from either of their normal operations. Just the 2 of them and Javier, no weapons, no crews. A conversation between men trying to solve a problem. Miguel agreed because he trusted Diego. Because Diego had been there through everything, had shared the risk, had proven himself loyal. Because when everything else was falling apart, Diego remained steady. The night before the meeting, Miguel couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't articulate what. He lay in his expensive bed in his expensive house, staring at the ceiling, trying to identify the source of his unease. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Diego works for Javier. Run." Miguel stared at the message, his mind refusing to process it. It had to be a trick. Misinformation designed to sow distrust. Diego couldn't be working for Javier. That would mean everything, every conversation, every plan, every moment of friendship had been a lie. He called Diego. "Did you send someone to my house?" "What? No, why would I?" "I got a weird message. Probably nothing, just paranoid." "Get some rest, brother," Diego said warmly. "Tomorrow we fix everything. Tomorrow we get our lives back." Miguel wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him, because if Diego was betraying him, then Miguel had already lost everything and just didn't know it yet. He went to the meeting anyway. Miguel arrived at the abandoned gas station 30 minutes early, a habit from his cautious days that he had never abandoned despite his growing confidence. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. He parked behind the building, checking his surroundings from every angle. Everything appeared normal. Empty highway, empty desert, empty sky. Just Miguel and the wind and the dying light. Diego arrived exactly on time, parking his SUV next to Miguel's vehicle. He stepped out with his characteristic smile, confident and relaxed. "Ready for this?" Diego asked. "Where's Javier?" "He'll be here. He's always late, likes to make people wait. You know how he is." They stood in the cooling evening air, not speaking, just 2 men waiting for a third who would determine their fate. Miguel's unease had become a physical sensation, a tightness in his chest that made breathing difficult. "Miguel," Diego said after a long silence, his tone shifting to something more serious. "There's something I need to tell you before Javier gets here." Miguel's hand moved instinctively toward his waistband, but he wasn't carrying. They had agreed, no weapons. That was the rule. Diego noticed the movement and laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh Miguel had grown familiar with. This laugh was cold, mocking. "The message you got last night," Diego continued. "It was true. I do work for Javier. I always have. From the very first day we met, I've been working for him." The desert seemed to tilt. Miguel's mind raced through every conversation, every meeting, every decision he had made over the past 6 months. All of it had been orchestrated. All of it had been theater. "Why?" Miguel's voice came out strangled. "Because Javier wanted to know if you were loyal," Diego explained, his voice matter-of-fact, almost bored. "You were too valuable to just kill based on suspicion, so he sent me to tempt you, to offer you everything you secretly wanted, and you took it, Miguel. Every step of the way, you chose betrayal over loyalty. The attacks on my operations, me, all me, Javier's people, following my orders, taking back what you stole. Did you really think you were being so clever? Did you really think someone like you could outsmart someone like Javier?" The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Roberto, the warehouse raid, the missing shipments, it had all been orchestrated to push Miguel into making the final move, to get him to openly break from Javier so there could be no question of his guilt. "My family," Miguel said, the fear finally overwhelming the shock. "Diego, please, my family had nothing to do with this." "Your family will be fine," Diego replied. "Javier isn't a monster. They'll lose everything you bought with stolen money, but they'll live. That's more mercy than you showed to the people who trusted you." Black SUVs appeared on the highway, 3 of them approaching fast. Miguel's mind raced through possibilities of escape. He could run into the desert, but they would hunt him down. He could fight, but he was unarmed against dozens. He could try to explain, to beg, to bargain, but he could see in Diego's eyes that none of it would matter. The verdict had been reached long ago. This meeting was just the execution of sentence. Javier stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by armed men. He walked toward Miguel with the same calm authority he had always projected, the authority of someone who had never doubted his power for even a moment. "Miguel," Javier said, his voice almost sad, "I gave you everything. I lifted you out of poverty. I trusted you with my business, my reputation, my livelihood, and you repaid me with betrayal. Javier, Don't." Javier raised his hand, silencing him. "Whatever you're about to say, I've heard it before. They always have justifications. They always have excuses. But betrayal is betrayal, regardless of the reasons." Miguel looked at Diego, who watched the scene with detached interest, like a scientist observing an experiment's conclusion. "He made it all seem so possible," Miguel said, not sure if he was explaining or just stating fact. "He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make me believe." "Because I studied you," Diego replied. "I learned what you wanted, what you feared, what you dreamed about." "It wasn't difficult, Miguel. You were so hungry for something more, so resentful of being second. All I had to do was offer you first place and watch you destroy yourself, reaching for it." Javier nodded slowly. "Ambition isn't a sin, Miguel, but disloyalty is. In our world, it's the only sin that matters. You knew this. I taught you this. Yet you chose to forget." "My family," Miguel tried again, desperation making his voice crack. "Please, Javier, they're innocent. My sister is studying medicine. She's going to help people. My mother, she doesn't even know what I do. Please don't punish them for my mistakes."
For a moment, something flickered in Javier's eyes. Not mercy exactly, but perhaps understanding. He had children too. He had a mother once. He remembered being young and hungry and desperate. Your family will be spared, Javier said finally. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm not in the business of killing medical students or old women. They'll lose everything you bought them with stolen money, but they'll have their lives. That's more than many traitors can say. Miguel felt a wave of relief, so intense it nearly buckled his knees.
Whatever happened to him now, Carmen would live. His mother would live. They would hate him, would be horrified when they learned the truth, but they would survive. "Thank you," Miguel whispered. Javier turned away, preparing to leave. The armed men moved closer to Miguel, surrounding him, cutting off any possibility of escape. This was the end. Miguel had always known it would end this way. Everyone in their business knew how the story concluded. He had just fooled himself into thinking he might be the exception. "Javier!" Miguel called out, his voice stronger now that he knew his family was safe. "One question. Why didn't you just kill me when you first suspected? Why go through all of this?" Javier paused, considering. "Because I wanted to be sure, because I wanted you to convict yourself beyond any doubt, and because—" He hesitated. "Because I hoped you wouldn't do it. I hoped that when it came down to it, you would choose loyalty. I genuinely hoped I was wrong about you." The admission carried a weight of sadness, a recognition that every betrayal was also a loss. Javier had trusted Miguel, had invested years in training him, had believed he was different from all the others who eventually turned. "I'm sorry," Miguel said, and meant it. "So am I," Javier replied. Then he walked away, climbing back into his SUV and disappearing down the desert highway, leaving Miguel with Diego and the armed men. Diego approached Miguel, pulling out a gun. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were smarter than most. In another life, different circumstances, we might have actually been friends." "No," Miguel replied, finding a strange clarity in his final moments. "In another life, different circumstances, neither of us would be here. We'd be regular people with regular problems. We'd never have met. And that would have been better for both of us." Diego's smile faltered slightly, as if Miguel had touched on something uncomfortably true. Then he stepped back, raising the weapon. Miguel closed his eyes, thinking of Carmen in her medical school classes, learning to save lives while her brother lost his. He thought of his mother's prayers offered to a God who apparently wasn't listening. He thought of his father, who had tried so hard to provide through legitimate means and had failed. He thought about the choice he had made years ago at that convenience store, counting crumpled bills, when Javier first offered him a different path. If he had said no, if he had walked away, would he still be poor? Probably. Would he still be struggling? Certainly. But would he be dead in the desert, killed by someone he had foolishly considered a friend? No, the question that would haunt any afterlife he might face was simple and devastating. Had the money been worth it? Had his years of power and respect and expensive things been worth the cost of his soul, his peace, and ultimately his life? The answer echoed in the desert silence. Carmen was in anatomy class when campus security came to find her. They told her there was a family emergency, that she needed to come immediately. She knew, even before they said anything specific, that it was about Miguel. Brothers who bought medical school tuitions with unexplained wealth always eventually generated emergencies. Her mother was already at the police station when Carmen arrived, looking 10 years older than she had that morning. A detective explained the situation with professional detachment. Miguel's body had been found in the desert. Execution style. Gang-related. They had questions about his business, his associates, his activities. "I don't know anything," Carmen heard herself saying, which was both true and false. She didn't know specifics, but she had known. They had all known, hadn't they? They had known and chosen to enjoy the money anyway, to ask no questions, to pretend the expensive house and the paid tuition had come from legitimate sources. The next weeks were a nightmare of legal proceedings and financial revelations. Everything Miguel had given them was seized: the house, the cars, her tuition money, all of it confiscated as proceeds of criminal activity. They moved into a small apartment, the kind of place they had lived before Miguel's success, the kind of place they had been so grateful to escape. Carmen had to leave medical school. The scandal made it impossible to stay, even if she could have afforded it. No one wanted to be associated with the sister of a cartel lieutenant. Her dreams of becoming a doctor died with her brother in that desert. Her mother stopped going to church. "I prayed for better circumstances," she explained, when Carmen asked why. "God gave us exactly what I prayed for. Turns out better circumstances can be more terrible than poverty. At least poverty was honest." Her father just looked tired, carrying the weight of a question he would never be able to answer. Should he feel grateful for the years of comfort Miguel had provided, or guilty for accepting money that came from so much suffering? Both seemed true, and neither seemed right. Diego disappeared. Some said he was promoted within Javier's organization, rewarded for successfully identifying and eliminating a traitor. Others claimed he moved to a different region, starting the same process with someone else, being the friend they needed right up until the moment he destroyed them. No one knew for certain, and no one dared to ask too directly. Javier continued operating his business with the same careful efficiency that had made him successful for 20 years. Miguel's territories were redistributed to more loyal lieutenants. The organization barely noticed the loss. People were replaceable. Trust, once broken, was not, which was exactly why betrayal was punished so completely. Years later, a different young man would face a similar choice. He would be counting coins outside a different store in a different neighborhood, and someone would approach with an offer that seemed to solve all his problems. One job, simple, good money, no questions. And perhaps he would say yes, beginning his own descent down the same path Miguel had traveled. Or perhaps, if he was wise or lucky or both, he would say no, accepting poverty over prosperity, struggle over ease, uncertainty over the kind of certainty that eventually led to a desert execution. The choice was always there. That was the tragedy. Nobody was forced into this life. They chose it step by step, justification by justification, compromise by compromise. They chose it because the alternative felt impossible, because their circumstances made crime seem reasonable, because they were smart enough to succeed, but not wise enough to refuse. Miguel had been smart. He had been capable, strategic, and talented in all the ways that mattered in his world. What he hadn't been was wise. He hadn't understood that in a business built on betrayal, trust was the scarcest commodity. He hadn't recognized that the man who helped you betray your boss would eventually help your boss betray you. He had trusted the wrong man, but more fundamentally, he had made the wrong choice years earlier when he decided that financial desperation justified moral compromise. Everything that followed, the violence, the fear, the paranoia, the eventual betrayal, flowed inevitably from that first decision. The money Miguel earned and spent over 8 years would eventually be calculated by prosecutors building their case against the organization. The number was staggering, millions of dollars flowing through his operations, enriching him and his associates, corrupting everyone it touched. But the real cost couldn't be calculated in currency. There was the cost to his family, who lost not just their brother and son, but their dignity, their standing in the community, their hope for the future. Carmen would eventually find work as a medical assistant, close enough to her dreams to be painful, but far enough to be devastating. She would spend the rest of her life wondering if she could have stopped her brother, if she should have asked more questions, if her silence made her complicit. There was the cost to the countless people affected by the drugs Miguel transported, the addicts who died from overdoses, the families destroyed by addiction, the communities ravaged by violence as organizations fought over territory and market share. Miguel had told himself he was just moving product, not responsible for what happened after. But every shipment carried consequences that rippled outward, touching lives he would never see and never count. There was the cost to the drivers, the packagers, the distributors, all the people who worked for Miguel, some of whom died in the orchestrated attacks Diego arranged, others who would eventually face their own reckonings with law enforcement or rivals. They had trusted Miguel to be competent, to protect them, to run a professional operation. Instead, they died because Miguel's ambition made him vulnerable to manipulation. There was even a cost to Diego, though he seemed to emerge successfully. Something changed in a person when they became professional at betrayal, when they could befriend someone for months while planning their death. Diego would carry that capacity with him forever, would know that he could smile and joke and seem genuine while calculating someone's destruction. That knowledge would poison every real relationship he might try to have, would make genuine trust impossible, would leave him isolated in ways he might not recognize until much later. And there was the cost to Javier, who lost someone he had considered almost a son. He had invested years in Miguel, had seen potential, had given opportunities he rarely extended. The betrayal confirmed his existing paranoia, reinforced his belief that trust was weakness, made him even more isolated and suspicious than he had been before. Each betrayal made him harder, colder, more ruthless. This was how men like Javier were created, not born monsters, but shaped by repeated disappointments into people who trusted no one and killed without hesitation. The desert where Miguel died didn't care about any of this. The wind continued to blow, the sand continued to shift, the sun rose and set with perfect indifference to human drama. In a few weeks there would be no sign that anything had happened there at all. Nature would erase the evidence just as thoroughly as the organization erased Miguel's existence from their records. But the consequences lived on, they always did. That was the thing about choices. They didn't end when you made them. They echoed forward, touching people and places and times you never imagined, creating ripples that spread farther than you could possibly predict. If there was a moral to Miguel's story, it was this: trust, once given, should be given carefully. And perhaps more importantly, not all opportunities should be accepted. Some paths, no matter how attractive they seem at the beginning, lead inevitably to destruction. Miguel's tragedy wasn't just that he trusted the wrong man, it was that he trusted the wrong life. He believed he could enter a world built on violence and betrayal and somehow remain untouched by those principles. He believed he could profit from suffering without experiencing it himself. He believed he was special, smarter than the others, destined to be the exception to every rule that had destroyed everyone else. This belief killed him long before Diego pulled the trigger. It killed him when he took the first job from Javier. It killed him when he decided his family's comfort justified any compromise. It killed him when he started to enjoy the power and respect that came from being feared. The man who counted coins outside the convenience store died years before his body was found in the desert. What lived on was just a ghost, going through motions, accumulating money and power that couldn't save him, couldn't protect him, couldn't give him what he actually needed, a way out, a way back, a chance to undo all those choices and become the person he might have been. There was no way back. There never was. This was the truth that Miguel understood too late. Some doors only open one way. Once you walk through, you can't return to who you were before. You can only go forward into whatever consequences await, carrying the weight of every decision, every compromise, every betrayal. Carmen understood this as she unpacked boxes in their small apartment, surrounded by the ruins of their better life. Her mother understood it as she took a job cleaning houses again, returning to the work she thought she had escaped. Her father understood it as he looked for employment in his 60s, competing with younger men for wages that wouldn't be enough but would have to be. They all understood that Miguel's choices had destroyed more than just himself. His choices had destroyed their choices, their opportunities, their futures. This was how crime worked. It spread like disease, infecting everyone connected to the infected, creating circles of damage that extended far beyond the original decision. And somewhere in the city, another young man was being approached with an offer. Someone was telling him about easy money, about one simple job, about how he was too smart to stay poor. Someone was offering him the same choice Miguel had faced years earlier. Would he make the same choice? Would he believe the same lies? Would he trust the wrong man and walk down the same path that had destroyed so many before him? Probably. Because the circumstances that made crime appealing hadn't changed, poverty still existed, desperation still drove people to compromise their principles. The math of legitimate wages versus illegal profits still didn't work for millions of people living at the margins. The cycle would continue because the conditions that created it continued. Miguel's story would be forgotten, replaced by the next tragedy and the one after that, an endless stream of young men who believed they were different, who believed they were smarter, who believed they could beat a game that was designed to destroy its players. This was the real tragedy, not just what happened to Miguel, but what would happen to all the others who followed the same path, making the same mistakes, trusting the wrong men, choosing the wrong life, discovering too late that some choices can't be undone. The desert wind kept blowing, the world kept turning, the cycle continued. And somewhere in that abandoned gas station, if you knew where to look, you could still find traces of what happened there. Not evidence exactly. That had been cleaned up efficiently by professionals who knew their business, but traces nonetheless. A feeling, a weight in the air.
A reminder that choosing wrong comes with permanent consequences. He trusted the wrong man, but even if he had trusted the right man, he would still have been in the wrong place, living the wrong life, walking a path that led nowhere except toward eventual destruction. That was the lesson. Trust wasn't enough. Choosing better partners wasn't enough. The only real choice was whether to enter that world at all. Everything after that first decision was just momentum carrying you toward an inevitable conclusion. Miguel never understood this until the very end, until those final moments when clarity came too late to matter. By then, all the choices had been made. All that remained was to face the consequences of trusting not just the wrong man, but the wrong life entirely. The sun set on the desert, darkness fell, and Miguel Reyes
and who had once counted coins outside a convenience store and dreamed of giving his family better, became another cautionary tale that no one would heed, another name that would be forgotten, another tragedy in an endless series of preventable disasters. He trusted the wrong man. But the truth was deeper and darker. There were no right men in the wrong business. There was no safe path in a dangerous world. There was no winning in a game designed to destroy everyone who played. This was what Miguel learned there at the end, when it was too late to matter, when the gun was raised and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions and there was nowhere left to run. He trusted the wrong man, and it cost him everything.